Hello everyone, and welcome to the third and last part of our video series of building the OM605, OM606 engines to a certain amount of power. Today we are talking about the biggest performance stage, so on the OM605, 400 to 550 horsepower, and on the OM606, 480 to 660 horsepower. And like in the last videos, I would like to give a disclaimer up front that this is only my personal opinion on building these engines to those power numbers. I know there are a lot of different concepts out there how to get power out of these engines, and a lot of people will do it differently and maybe with much less cost. But I personally always have a focus on a long-lasting build, so I will advise a lot of work that will also cost a little more but will make the engines last longer at a certain amount of power. Also, some people will argue that the power numbers I just named aren't the actual limit of building these engines, and this might be true, but I would like to try to explain to you why it doesn't actually make sense to build these engines to a higher amount of power. And this has to do with some points. One of them is, for example, the thermical stability. So if you're building, for example, an OM606 to a performance level of 700 horses with an extremely big turbocharger and all other modifications, you will have an engine that will be very hard to keep cool and to keep thermically stable. This won't be much of a problem if you don't really race it or just accelerate a few times on the straight and then go back to driving normal. But this is not a usable setup from my point of view. If you want to build a usable setup, it should be able to make at least one round on the track without overheating. And this is what I would say 90% of the OM606, OM605 builds out there aren't able to do. So for me, it doesn't make sense to build them higher because you will get problems with the thermical stability. You will get problems with the turbo lag. If you want to prevent big turbo lag when having a big turbo which can flow the amount of air necessary for the 700 horses, you will have to put a lot of effort and money into, for example, a sequential twin charge setup or a sequential supercharged and turbo setup. If you don't do that, you will just basically have an A engine driving around, and after 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, the big turbo which is necessary for that power level will start spooling, and you will have approximately 1,000 to 2,000 RPM power range you can actually use. And this is not a useful engine setup for me. So I would never build those engines to a higher amount of power I just named, but this is up to you. That's what you have to decide for yourself. I just want to show you the modifications you should consider when building these engines, and this is what we have a closer look onto now. And for the power range, we have to dive in deep into the engine. So after, for example, 450 horses and the correlating power number on the OM606, which is I think 540 horses, you are at risk of bending your rods. This of course depends on the turbo setup. Will you have early spool, like at low RPM, a lot of torque, then it is more likely to happen. But after this power amount, we should think about getting steel rods. That's what I would advise you to do after 400 horses on the 605 and 480 horses on the 606. Get a set of nice steel rods. I will have some rods maybe in the future in my online shop, but not at the moment. But there are a lot of brands out there you can get rods from. And at the point where we exchange the rods, we basically have to disassemble the whole engine. So we are mainly in for whole engine rebuild, which can be very costly, but we can save some money when, for example, using the pistons again. not get the block bored to a bigger size, just use the pistons, get the block resurfaced on the cylinders and also decked, and then use the old pistons with some new piston rings. And of course, while we disassemble the crank assembly, we should think about getting new bearing shells. And at that point, you could also think about using CDI bearing shells. They fit perfectly and they are a little stronger on the most stressed sides because they're Sputter bearings. Then of course use the main bearing stud kit I have in my online shop. And then for the crank assembly, you're mainly done. I've seen people using girdle plates, but I'm not sure this is necessary for the power mount I named. And as I've explained to you, it's not worth it for me to go higher than that. I think it is not necessary to use a girdle plate, but that's also up to you. Then you could also think of upgrading the oil pump. That's what I did on my race car. Get some bigger one from the CDI, for example, which has two stages of pump gears, and adjust the overflow pressure a little with some washers. This can help get the right amount of oil and the right oil pressure at high RPM. When you, for example, have like a sequential turbo setup with two turbochargers that haven't ball bearings, they could use up a lot of oil, so it would be good to have like more oil flow through the engine with a bigger oil pump. Then of course we would exchange all timing chain elements like the guides, the chain itself, timing chain sprocket on the crankshaft. And what could be also a good idea is to renew the main pulley, because they have some rubber here which holds the weight on the outside, and the rubber can get old and brittle, and then when applying a lot of force and a lot of power to these engines, they tend to break off. I've seen some aftermarket upgrades for this with some harmonic dampers. This could be also a good idea. And then of course, while you have the crankshaft out, you could maybe machine the slot for the key different. That's what I did on my own 605 engines. I can show you a picture to have more security of the sprocket not moving around on the crankshaft, and also the main pulley. This all helps with the performance level and the long-lasting setup. For the block, I think then we have done everything we can to prevent any damage and to have it stable enough for that amount of power. Let's talk about the head assembly then. For the head assembly, a lot of things I already told you apply to this performance stage 2, of course. We should rebuild the whole head assembly, grind in the valves, maybe think about getting new valve guides if they have too much play already. Drill the central hole of the pre-chambers bigger like I showed you in the last video. Seal the pre-chambers with the copper washers. Get the upgraded heat shields for the injectors. And then you should really think about getting like the intake and exhaust ports widened and machined to get more flow. This can only help. You have to be careful to not make them too big and grind into the water channels. Then also on the pre-chambers there can be done a modification. You all know the ball inside the pre-chamber where the injector sprays the diesel on, and this ball is inserted from this side, and then it has a small pin which goes in through this hole, and sometimes there's like a gap between these two elements, so exhaust gases can have a way to move out of the pre-chamber and collide with the aluminium cylinder head wall. This usually is not harmful, but at the high boost pressures and when also using water methanol injection, the exhaust gases exiting here can be like a plasma cutter, and they cut into the material of the cylinder head. That's what happened to my race car. I was using water ethanol injection, so I don't know if that is the main cause, but I really think so, because a lot of people drive with the 8mm pumps and don't have this problem. And I didn't have this problem too up until I used a lot of water ethanol injection. So I think when using water injection on these engines, it can be very dangerous that the exhaust gases exiting here will cut into the cylinder head. And then at one point they will cut deeply into the head up until the water channels, and you will have symptoms like with a blown cylinder head, a lot of pressure in the water system, and also water leaking back into the pre-chambers then. So you should maybe think about weld them shut, TIG weld them, and get this sealed. Then for the reassembly of the cylinder head, I would use a good gasket from Elring or Victor Reinz, and then use the head stud kit I have in my online shop to have the highest security of not getting a blown head gasket at high boost pressures. For the OM605, of course, you should think about upgrading the intake manifold, because as you see or know, this is plastic and this will not last long after 2 bars of boost for a long time. So this should be upgraded. Also, you can make the runners a little shorter to have like more peak performance at high RPM. There are some companies out there which offer very short runner intake manifolds which have the collecting volume directly near the head. So this could be a good upgrade for high performance build. And in any way you should upgrade to aluminium on the 605. The 606 already has the aluminium intake, but it is always helpful at those power numbers to like port anything you can. So also get this ported, like make all diameters as big as possible to get the air flowing nicely. Then that's for the main engine, so for the naked engine assembly. Of course, there's much more possible. If you're rebuilding the whole engine, you could, for example, get a stroker crankshaft, or like upgrade to the CDI crankshafts, which have a little bit more lift and get some more displacement, which helps always with the power figures. But that's up to you. It's combined with a lot of effort and also special rods to get the piston position right again. Then let's move to the injection pump side. Mainly everything I told you in the last video with the performance stage 300 to 400 or 360 to 480 on the OM606. This all applies also to this performance stage, except for the element size. So get the injectors rebuilt, get like a new injector inlay, so the nozzle with the higher flow, with the higher possible flow. Adjust the pressure to 155 bars, for example, get it a little bit higher. And also then for the pump, for me personally, at this performance stage, it's not useful to have the electronic pump. You will run into a lot of trouble with bonanza effect. So I personally would only use the mechanical pump, so 8mm elements or 8.5, which are kind of hard to get, I think. At least it was a few years back then, not sure how it is today. You can use Macon elements, Mune elements. They develop their own 8mm elements, so this is also something you can consider. They behave a little bit different than the Bosch element copy. Then me personally, I would get rid of this whole filter assembly, like throw it out and just use a big pump at the tank, get a pressure regulator on the outside of the injection pump, and then adjust the pressure to 2.5, 3 bars. To get enough fuel into the injection pump, and also have bigger size hoses and pipes to flow enough fuel for that power. Then for the turbo side, as I try to explain to you, you can prevent big turbo lag by using a VTG turbocharger or have a sequential turbo setup, for example, which is a lot of effort and a lot of custom manufacturing to get this done nicely. I have to say I've never seen in the whole community a nice working compound turbo setup. A lot of people tried it, did it, but I've never seen some nice power figures from a compound setup yet. I would just go with a big single turbo, but get some modern turbo, which will help with the turbo lag, get some early spool, possible turbocharger sizes and brands you will also find on my tuning guide page on my online shop. Just go to w202.store and you will find some tuning guides for the OM605 and OM606 where I named a lot of turbochargers for this performance level. I don't have them all in my head right now, so this is the easiest way. That's mainly it on preparing this engine for the named amount of power. It doesn't sound like much, but of course you have to consider that all the peripheral systems on the car need to be adjusted to the amount of power too. So we're talking about intake side, air filter side, exhaust side. You have to make sure you have a good flowing setup. Then we need to talk about gearbox, clutch kit to get the power to the ground. There's a lot of effort you have to do, a lot of labor to get the car prepared for this amount of power and have it lasting a long time. Engine is only one of many points for a car to perform nice. That's what I always say and always try to tell people, because a lot of people just think engine is the main factor, but there are a lot of other factors which are important to have a nice driving car. So I will end this video series now on building these engines. It kind of became exhausting for me to make 3 videos on this topic, running around the engine, just talking and showing actually nothing much. But I still hope this was interesting for you and you could gain some information you didn't know yet, or like have a new perspective on building these engines. As I said, it's just my personal opinion. I'm not sure if I will ever build one of these engines again. I still have this one, but I'm thinking of selling it because I want to focus mainly on my actual projects and not like start something new while the other stuff is not finished yet. But I think this is also good for me to sum up this topic and have all the information in my head in 3 videos, and I personally might get back to those videos too in the future and like look up some information I have already forgotten. So I hope you liked it. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, and see you in the next video.